So
We'll
Paula,
see.
let me turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Sherry. First of all, I just want to say when Sherry asks you to do something, you do it because she does everything. So we have to do things when she asks. So thank you, Sherry, for asking me to do this. I wish I hadn't watched that film because I'm all choked up as well. But I think I've recovered now. So I'm really happy to be here and introduce 12 panelists. We have a large group today, so but we do want to give everyone a chance to speak. I I didn't start folk dancing until 1974. That's when it found me, and I found it. I was 15 years old, and it was just the best thing ever. And I will say that all of the people on this panel were my idols in the 70s. I looked up to them and watched them and hoped to emulate them in any way possible. And so it's my great honor and pleasure to be hosting this panel today. We're going to briefly go through introductions. So I'm going to call on everybody on the panel to just say who you are and where were you in the 70s. This is a short introduction, and then we'll get more of a chance to talk about some of our topics after introductions. So I'll start yes, alphabetical order by last name, just because, when you're a teacher, that's what you do. So I'd like to start with Lori Allen.
And maybe to make things well, is the presenter feel free to start talking before we spotlight you so we don't waste any time as our text finds you.
Okay, so I suppose I could blame rainy day PE activities in elementary school when students would be herded into the cafetorium and learn square dances. In particular, Oh Johnny, oh, and yes, I still remember the lyrics. When I was about 9 or 10, I started dancing at Sunday school, which continued with summer camps. And my first instructors at summer camp were Rahavia Yakovy and then Israel Yakovy. When a youth group activity brought us to Zorba as the Greek folk dance coffee house in Reseda, I watched some Zadruga members dancing, and particularly a very young Jane Kirkland. And as I watched, I knew I wanted to learn this dance form. I ended up getting a BA in dance and joined several performing groups while I was in college. And we all danced at many different folk dance coffee houses all over Southern California. We would drive great distances to feed our habit.
Thank you, Lori. And next, Mitch Allen.
I actually started with the Folk Dance Federation of California as in the only teenage folk dance club there was in the Folk Dance Federation, called the Inner Teens, in the mid 60s. And I've been dancing since then. After when I went off to college to Santa Barbara, did dance there as both a performer, a teacher at the Placa, the coffee house there, and directed a folk dance ensemble in Santa Barbara for a year. Graduating, I moved back down to Los Angeles and joined the coffee house scene very actively. Danced with performing groups. Eventually, very soon after that, I joined Amon and stayed with them for 12 years. I taught at the intersection. Lori and I were the editors of Folk Dance Scene for a couple of years, and for a couple of years I was also the executive director of Amon. In the mid 80s, after that, I packed up and moved to Northern California and kind of dropped out of folk dancing for several decades. And I'm back now.
Yay, we're glad you're back. And Tom Bozigian, are you?
Yeah, we're here.
All right.
Tom and Sherry. My time at the intersection started at the old intersection. That's really 1963, I have in my mind, till 1971, then I went to school in Armenia. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, Sherry, that was the end of my intersection days, right after 1971. I think so, yeah. So I can tell you about the old intersection. I know a lot of people, some of the later people, because I'm probably the oldest. I'm probably about the oldest. I don't know most of you. I know the 4 people in the video that I'm talking about, 4 squares, I know them. But those days at the old intersection, that was right there on Alvarado, not far from the 101 freeway, that was hot. a smaller place, but very, very active. And what I was always impressed about with the intersection was all the ethnic people who used to come there. So that was always good for folk dance. I enjoyed that. And with my years with Athen, we did a lot of things together, especially the old intersection. And I took them to a lot of Armenian events, and I have fond memories of that. Sherry, Harper and I met at the San Diego Folk Dance Camp. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Like 1969 or 1969, I think.
And that's just about it. But good dancing years those days.
Thank you. Since we're with you, Sheree, do you want to just speak a little bit about
real
what you were
quick.
doing in the 70s?
Yeah, I got into folk dancing at Grant High School, 1970, I believe, because I didn't want to do regular PE. I had a folk dance class with Mrs. Nemeth. I remember her. She was a Federation member, and she got me into it with my friends, and we started going to Zorba's, Intersection sometimes, Gypsy Camp. I continued with dancing all my college years, and that's where I met Tom in 1974. And so that's it.
Wow, thank you. Billy Burke.
Yeah, I started folk dancing at about the age of 3 or 4. My mom was a teacher, was taught, and I danced with in the San Francisco Bay Area. I danced with every group there was, all nationalities. I was lucky to go to Mendocino folklore camp for 50 years or so. I went to Stockton a couple 3 years. I went to the last 2 years of the Santa Barbara camp, the first year of San Diego. Atanas lived in San Francisco in the late 60s, and I danced with him. So when I moved to LA, I had a pretty good repertoire of, a lot of dances. And within 2 weeks of moving to town, I was teaching at the intersection and at Zorba's. And I joined Amon thanks. Well, they knew me from San Francisco and were a little surprised that I moved down. And the final step was I was supposed to go teach at Zorba's at the very first Amon Institute at Plummer Park, and I couldn't stay for the evening, and they were still trying to talk me into joining the group. So Paul Sheldon said, "I'll go teach your class," and he went out to Zorba's and taught, and I continued. I joined Amon and continued teaching at the intersection for several years, and that's that.
And one of my first folk dance teachers. Thank you. Fusai.
Hi.
Hey.
Yes, I feel like I'm in a wrong place because I wasn't living in the States until 84. So, though I started coming to the United States camps 1976 at Mendocino Folklore Camp, I believe. And then going to San Diego, Stockton, and I met many teachers. So that's it. I guess that's why I'm here.
You're never in the wrong place if it's folk dancing. Let me just say.
Okay.
Thank you. Sherry, you're here.
So I grew up in the Midwest, didn't know anything about folk dancing, and then I went to college in Tucson at the University of Arizona, and I was a freshman in the School of Pharmacy. I had to get all my pharmacy courses out of the way, and then I had to get a PE course. So I went to the PE building, and they had fencing and folk dance available. So I chose folk dance, and I became, part of Agnes Garner's group. I think there's a connection with Tom on this. He knew Agnes Garner. So she taught me my beginning folk dances and sent me on a scholarship to San Diego camp where I met everybody. And then, my plan very quickly became to move to Los Angeles. And I did that in 1976, and I was teaching in the coffee houses pretty quickly. Not at the intersection right away. I was at the Horo, and then when the Horo closed, Athen recruited me. And I met even more of you than I knew before.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. John Gibson.
Hi.
Hey, John.
I come from Ventura, California, and it's up by Santa Barbara. Um, my sister went to UC Santa Barbara, and I think she was influenced. She probably did some folk dancing there. My mom was a very avid dancer, in the 40s with the jitterbug and whatnot. But I wasn't really involved with dancing at all. But my sister needed somebody to go with her to the art center up in Ojai. So I went up there with her and sat on the side and watched people do stuff. And la- later, I danced around in Ventura, and then unlike most of you who are teachers and I don't know, well-known personalities, as it were, I'm just a happy folk dancer essentially. So that's it. I moved to LA in around '76 because I had gone to the intersection once on a Wednesday, and I got drafted to join the Amman Folk Ensemble. So they said you should come to a whatever. So I went and tried out, and my favorite tryout dance was Beranche, which I'd never heard before. So I kind of sucked at that. But other than that, I mean, I've been dancing everywhere ever since, pretty much.
And playing music.
Well, we aim to please.
Well, we in just like in the modern days, we have the teachers and the leaders, but we also have the influencers. So I'll just leave it there. Steve.
Okay. The implication is I'm an influencer. Oh my God, where's my TikTok account?
I know, right? Folk dance TikTok. Steve Kotansky.
Yeah, I started up in Palo Alto as a high school student. I went to the Stanford University, and within a week or two, I was all over the Bay Area. And I danced, and I met Billy very early on. As a matter of fact, Billy told me, "You're coming to Los Angeles and you're going to join Amman." I became a dance major at UCLA in 1970. But and then I danced with Amman. I danced with Vince Evanchuk and Billy in Vince's Ukrainian group, and then Robin Evanchuk had an American dance group, the Liberty Assembly. I danced there, and I used to teach as a guest teacher, often either at Intersection or at Zorba's. I remember often that Barry would say, "I need you, Kotansky, to keep him humble," and so. And I met a lot of my dearest friends who are still friends in the folk dance world. That's the wonderful thing. After all these years, it's as if we can always come home to this. Thank you.
Absolutely. I feel the same way. Speaking of, I'd love to see Rue Esther now. Rue's probably one of the people that I've known the longest on this.
Hi, I'm here. Well, I did a lot of what Laurie Allen did. I started with Rainy Day PE at the cafetorium in grammar school and had not dancing at the church, but dancing at the temple. And then, so the start with my feet in a lot of different pools of dance environment. And like Laurie, I haven't stopped dancing since. I was kind of making a list of the various kinds of dances that I have done. I'll leave that to some list that I share some other time. It was shocking to see how broad it was. But I danced in college in classes. I danced in university in classes. I danced at Zorba's first because that was the place that was closest, then museum, then intersection, and the federation groups, the cultural groups. And by the mid-'70s, I was in the Basque provinces of Spain doing field research for my master's thesis. So lots of different things. I was in Jack Kinnear's Polynesian group before it was Otea. It was Jack, Kay Ragland, and me. We were doing Polynesian. Yeah, that's one of the fun questions. I danced in the Zorba's performing group. I danced in the Yugoslav group at UCLA. I danced in West Wind Ensemble. I danced in Amman. I danced in Narodno. So I have been from studying, training, following, etc. At Zorbas, my two earliest teachers were Tom, who's here, Tom Bozigian, and Dick Oakes. My life mentor would probably be Elsie Dunnan. She is beyond belief amazing and really a mover and inspiration person. Jack Kinnear was awesome. Allegra Fuller Snyder at UCLA, what an inspiration. And I was reading something about that, and she and Elsie were opposites of the same kind of passion. Others that were really, really crucial and important were Dick Crum, who, when I would come back to LA, until he passed, we would get together and spend an afternoon, a day, or an evening just chatting and visiting and sharing stories. Ingvar Newfried Söderdahl and Andor Tsompo, Ada Jivanoska, Anthony Ivancic, Imro, etc. Many, many remarkable people. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Rue. Oh, lovely. Thank you so much. I'll bring on Paul Sheldon, who was here a little while ago.
Wow. Yeah, so I started dancing at the age of 5 at the Ice House in Sierra Madre, where I learned All American Promenade, Grand Square, and Oh Johnny Oh. and then graduated a year later to Pasadena Folk Dance Co-op, where my sister and I went every Friday night faithfully for a decade until someone told us about the museum in Pasadena around 1963 or 4. Steve Murillo and I were tennis partners at Elliott Junior High School, now Elliott Magnet School, which unfortunately is a pile of ashes this week. My condolences to all the people affected by the fires. Um, and then someone invited us to the intersection, and that was the end. I mean, it was just the mecca of folk dancing. It was so incredible. We would, as I mentioned earlier, we'd start at Pasadena Co-op, go to the museum, then the intersection, then to Zorba's, then to Cafe Danza, and back around. Later, we added Gypsy Camp. And I was kind of the go-to teacher. Rudy Dennis chose me as his more or less successor on Saturday nights. And so my record was teaching 5 nights at the intersection when people were out of town. I taught Greek and Balkan and Israeli and international all in one week. And then another week I taught at 5 different coffee houses at the intersection and Cafe Danza and Zorba's and the museum and Chalo's Red Mill House in Eagle Rock. It was quite a busy time back then. I went on to dance with Alman. So many teachers and mentors. Oh my goodness! And met Dick Crum in Pittsburgh in 1970. He had a wonderful group on Tuesday nights at the YWCA, where I learned so much from him, not just about the dances, but about teaching. And Yves Moreau also. Yves always emphasized rhythm first and then the dance. And Ethan Karras taught us about the difference between doing dances and dancing. And dancing is a way to get what he called ecstasis, to get out of the ordinary into a shared consciousness. So I'll just stop there, other than to say that I think over the years I counted that I've led dancing now for more than 100,000 people. It's an incredible community of people. And thanks everyone who's here keeping it alive.
Thank you, Paul. And finally, we have Ann Sirota.
I started dancing in 1967. I was still an immigrant, even though I had become an American citizen by then, but I consider myself an immigrant. And I just graduated from UCLA and was kind of looking for something to feel good about. And some cousins of mine who had just arrived from Lebanon met some Greek guys in a class at English class, and they told them, come to this place that we go to, hang out, have coffees, just like the Middle East. So we all traipsed out there to Zorba, and I fell in love. That was it. I fell in love with dancing, not with anybody person, but with dancing. And I danced at Zorba for about a year and a half. And my very first dance class was a Shlomo Bachar. It was learning Israeli dancing, Manavu. And Dick Oakes used to go out there, and Paul Sheldon was there. I remember Paul and his sister just coming to dance. And I remember Rue, who was also used to come there from those days, Rue Lester. And then, so I stayed at Zorbas about a year and a half, and they started a dance group, which I guess became Zadruga. And I wanted to join the group, and they didn't take me into the group. And so I got mad and I said, okay, I'm not coming to Zorba's anymore. And I went to the intersection, which I had heard about. And I joined the Greek dance group there. Ethan took me in to dance. And that was the beginning of my, focused love affair with Greek dancing. I became, I still danced other things. As a matter of fact, I used to go to the intersection, easily 4 nights in a row, sometimes 6 or 7. In 1970, I had to leave. I started going to the intersection in 1969, and somewhere around 1970, I had to leave my apartment, the apartment I had in West LA, and I decided to move to Echo Park because it was next to the intersection. And Sarah Miller and I got an apartment together in what was then, interesting enough, low income housing because neither one of us made a whole lot of money. I was a teacher in LUSD, and in those days there was nothing. Anyway, started going to the intersection. Sarah was also in the dance group, and we lived there. So it was really easy to go to the intersection 7 nights a week. And I didn't always go 7 nights a week, but I for sure went 4. I was there from Thursday to Sunday. Of course, Thursday and Sunday was Greek night, and that's where I sort of really found my niche. I was much more of a Greek dancer than any of the other nationalities, ethnicities, even though I learned a lot of those dances. And the other night when Sherry played some of those dances that I knew way back when, and I could not get up and do them, but I know that if I had a couple of days exposed to those dances, I would be able to do them all again. So I stayed in Greek dancing, and eventually a group of us left the intersection dancers and started Panegyri. And Panegyri, so then that was in 1975. And then Panegyri remained as a dance group until 1985, when Nick Faviciotis, who directed that group, decided that he didn't want to direct anymore. He was tired. He had kids. And so he didn't have kids, actually, but he got married. And then after Panegyri, in 1985, Panegyri disbanded, and we formed another group called Elas Greek Dancers, directed by Charlie Kyriakou. And then when that sort of folded a few years later, I stopped dancing as a dance group. But I did keep dancing. And somewhere along the way, in the late 70s or early 80s, I was doing exclusively Greek dancing. But in all those years, I think I went to almost every single folk dance cafe there was at some point or other. We went to Gypsy Camp, we went to Cafe Danza, we went to Horo, I went back to Zorba's at one time. The only place I'd never been was a museum. Somehow I never made it there. But like Paul says, you'd go to one place and wind up finishing the evening somewhere else. Or I had dinner with my family and I wound up at the intersection. You just always there. It was really what it said in the video, a home away from home. So I'll leave that for now and pick it up later.
Thank you so much, Anne. So today, we only have an hour and a half for what I believe we could have an entire conference about, which, about folk dancing, period. But we singled out, the purpose of this panel was to single out the 70s. And I call it a golden age of folk dancing. I didn't say the golden age in my description. It's a golden age of folk dancing, certainly for lots of different reasons. And so today this is touching the bare surface of this topic. And so I viewed it as my journalistic training and went somewhere in my background. So I just looked at a who, what, when, where, why, and how kind of approach. And so we're going to take small groups so that there can be some interaction between our panelists, some discussion. And so I'm going to bring up our first 4 panelists, which will be Lori, Billy, Sherry, and Anne. So Anne just stays right on. And this is exploring who. So I asked, who were the dancers? What was the milieu of the 70s? What are some of the demographics, for example, and geography of folk dancing? Because especially I think in California, the West Coast, geography really had something to do with how folk dancing happened. So This is very open, so take it away.
Okay, I'll start. I think that most of the people I have to focus on Greek night because that was really my milieu. There's a lot of young people in their 20s and 30s, people who were sort of felt like they didn't fit into the mainstream. We were really are kind of a square pegs in round holes. We like this sort of counterculture atmosphere that the folk dancing brought. And I think there were a lot of people who were newly immigrants from Greece, from the Balkans, who sort of found their way to the intersection. Um, Partly because of the music, partly because it was really a place to hang out. You didn't need to be in a couple like so many other dance uh, experiences. You could go by yourself and you were sure to find somebody you knew the night that you went because people went every night. And I think that I know that was one of the big attractions for me that I didn't need anybody to go with. I could go by myself and I was for sure seeing somebody there that I knew. And even if I didn't, I could just get in the line and dance. And there was something for me because I was an immigrant. There was something about being in that counterculture and that immigrant culture that was really attractive. I never fit, I never really fit into an American culture. Even in college, my friends were people who had some kind of a other European background. So this was like a dream come true to be among people who either had an ethnic background or were interested in the ethnic background. And I felt that I had found something that I fit into. And, like dancing has been my passion besides my children. That's been my passion in life. And I never gave it up. Um, and I met so many people through there. And even though people would dance for a while and then they would leave, they would go away, they would stop dancing, they had kids, they got married, whatever, they moved away from LA. But my friends have always been people who danced, so I kind of moved along and made new friends who were still interested in Greek dancing or Balkan dancing, counterculture dancing. um, Eventually I became involved with FDF, the Greek dance competition, and became a judge at FDF, but that was way later. But I've stayed involved in Greek dancing since then, even though sometimes I can't quite get up and dance. But my back, my knees, age has its
Yeah.
da-
Lori.
damage.
Yeah, Lori.
Well, we were like the children of post-World War II. We were the boomers. We were the post-World War II, and there was a whole lot of us. And a lot of there was a migration in Los Angeles of different communities that moved to Los Angeles from like Boyle Heights to Fairfax out to the San Fernando Valley. And I think the San Fernando Valley was kind of like the fertile crescent of so many people folk dancing and doing this. It's just a thought that I had about all of that. How those communities, how those ethnic communities or post-World War II communities moved and where some of the offspring or spawn of those families or people that, after World War II.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff with that across, I mean, because you can talk about the 60s and 70s and counterculture with all of that. Billy, what are your thoughts?
I think that the draw for me was, well, of course, it was someplace I could teach and make a little money. I moved to LA with 20 bucks in my pocket, and made a phone call in Santa Barbara and found a place to stay. So getting teaching quickly was important. But what was a draw to me is there were a lot of young people and they could dance. The level of dance was really pretty high. We had a beginner class and an advanced class. I taught Wednesday and Fridays. Um, and the Wednesday was the saying was anybody traveling through town that knew anything about Balkan dance had to show up at the intersection on Wednesday. That was it. You just knew if I knew if a friend was coming to town, I would find them at the intersection on Wednesday. I mean, it's just you had to be there. So that was the real draw. I mean, and ultimately for people who weren't teaching, who had to pay, it was a fairly inexpensive evening. I mean, to be able to have a full evening of dance and song and playing and friends for really ultimately really not very much. I think that was a big draw too.
Yeah. Yeah. Sherry, what do you think of who were the dancers in the 70s? Who were we?
Who were we?
Yeah. Or any, what was how did we fit in?
How did we fit in? Well, I
Or
know
not?
for me, I like the comment that Anne made about what a square peg in a round hole. We were kind of off the beaten path kind of people. And I know for me, I was painfully shy before I started dancing, and all of a sudden I had a social life.
Mhm.
I felt I felt safe, I felt comfortable, and I felt accomplished because I was good at it. And I found that I was good at teaching. So, that's how I moved to LA and was teaching at the coffee houses 2 weeks later. And I, like Billy, moved here with not very much money. It was time. I just got in my car and I went. I was part of the Tucson invasion, which I know that you want to talk about it at some point.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I think for me, it was the social life, and
Mhm.
all of my friends are dancers. I have family and I have my dance friends,
Yeah.
and they've been friends. I mean, I have never stopped teaching and dancing. I've had my class now since in LA since 1976. It's either been on Wednesday or Friday. Um,
I see a party happening next year.
yeah, it's either been a Wednesday or a Friday or another night. There's times when I've been teaching like 5 nights a week, because I taught at the other coffee houses too. Um, but I mean, I went from being somebody who would not come up and talk to you to somebody who, could carry on a conversation because we had something in common.
Yeah. Well, as much as I'd love to just keep with this group, I'm going to move on to the next group now. Thank you so much. And I just want to preface, so we're going to talk about what did we dance? I love Rue mentioning that she made a list and she was amazed. And so, in fact, we're going to bring Rue back and we're going to bring John, we're going to bring Steve back. And I just want to add something here that about dance, that dance is embodied knowledge, right? And so we dancers, it's a personal and a global
I'll
experience.
just say a word here before we get going here. For those of you who've not seen my talks before,
Oh, someone who is unmuted is playing Richard Powers' video.
And for human being,
There we go.
Okay.
A quick drop by Richard Powers.
Thank you, Adoni.
So I was saying that dance is embodied knowledge, right? And we have both the personal experience of dance and our personal stories and our sort of global stories. And Rue, I wanted to say this also because you mentioned your teachers, and so we're so influenced by all of the people that we learned from, and we hold those people, those dancing bodies in our dancing bodies. So with that, I'd just like to talk about what did we dance? I mean, everything. So jump in.
I'll start. I think a lot of us came in with a list as long as you had there with all those kinds of dances. And ultimately, we refined that to something that we really spoke to our passions. But then over time, I think we've gone back out, that we've realized that, as you were just saying, it's not just Balkan dance, it's dance. That we're no longer just. I'm attracted to all kinds of dancing now, and I teach little ones. But what I remember of the '70s, I was only in Los Angeles from 1970 as a dance major at UCLA. I went down there because Elsie was there, and also I took classes with Allegra. And I didn't want to become a modern dancer, but I joined. Billy Burke got me into Aman, and then we got into all these other groups. But what I really found there at that time that I really want to emphasize through Aman was this gravitation toward what we called village dances. And the group Pituguli, I'm going to bring them up because they were so important at that point. Mark Levy on Gaida, Stu Brotman on gaida and other instruments. Stu Menon on gaida and Stu Brotman on gadolka. David Shockett on kaval. Eddie Liddell playing the drum, and Chris Yasetta. And Lauren Brody jumped in, and also Carol. I can't remember Carol's last name from Amman.
Silverman?
Ackley.
Oh, Ackley. Yeah.
Not Ackley. No.
Carol Silverman, right?
No, not Silverman. It was Carol who played flute in Amman. She was tall, dark-haired.
Carol Schneider?
Not Schneider. No, Carol. I know who it is, and it's none of those three.
We'll find her.
Anyway, Carol too, and I kind of became a mascot then because we were hanging out with ethnics, and they were learning their material from records. I mean, it's not like any of them. Mark had been to the Balkans, David had been to the Balkans, but that began to really evolve then, and we would hang out with ethnics, and so that's what I remember. Besides dancing, performance dance, I really enjoyed those dances, those pravos that would go for 15, 20 minutes. And it was primarily Macedonian and Bulgarian, Bitov and Izvorno. And then Petse Atanasovsky came over and helped the band, and just learning the languages too. And I sort of drifted from dance into language, and we would knock our heads with Tony Shea and everything, because Tony was very, very academic, and he was right in most cases that kind of music was not village music. It was village inspired, but it had come out of the socialist periods of those countries. But nonetheless, we would go to Sweets Mill. We would go up to Santa Barbara. We would play at the intersection. There was a gentleman from Bulgaria that had a club for a while. I can't remember his name.
Asen
Radenkov.
Asen had a club, and they would often play there. And
that was the Haro.
The Haro. Okay,
Haro.
No, there was another place. Asen had a different place.
Yeah, Asen had a different place, but and Leo Nedev had a place out in, there were ethnics, and there were also all of us, and we were looking up to these. Here I am, 6'2", and my role model is a little man who's not even 5 feet tall, but maybe 4 feet wide in Nestor.
Nestor.
But that was, for me, the connection, that ethnic connection that I hadn't had yet, though I'd been to the Balkans in 1970 for the first time. But that was an outgrowth of Amman and musicians and dancers coming together. And that's sort of that took me then when I got the scholarship, the Ruby Vachetta scholarship. I went to Yugoslavia, and I joined Robert Liebman in May, and we went from village to village, from festival to festival. And then Dale and I went to to Petse's camp, and we also went to the Smotra Folklore also, and also to the folk dance camps that were run in Yugoslavia. So it really opened that door for me. So, and now I'm back at that long list. I'll do anything if it moves. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Susie Shapiro mentioned that was Carol Weber.
Thank you, Carol Weber.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
I lived in her house.
All right. I just wanted to jump in and say that before. So let's hear from someone else in this group. Lori.
Hi.
Hi. You're at the top of my screen.
Okay. Are we still? We're still on question 2?
Yeah.
Okay.
What did we dance?
It was interesting. I think a number of people, not everyone, started with different Israeli groups, and then they migrated and went out to other groups when they would go visit the various coffee houses, and something else would come on, and you kind of go, "Oh, now that's something I want to go do," and it just expanded our horizons.
Mm-hmm.
So,
absolutely, yes. John.
One of the things about the what part is that no matter, and I traveled a little bit with work at one point along the line, but you could literally go to any folk dance event anywhere, like I was in Oklahoma, Texas. You could just walk in and they're playing the same things, right? Because a lot of them were using the same records, and the Nama whatever and the whatever. You guys all know way better than me, but that was an interesting thing, and I think it speaks a little bit to what maybe Anne and Sherry were talking about, which was, it's kind of a comfortable environment. You go in and it's like, oh, it's the same music is playing. I don't know any of these people. They don't know me, but I can, because of a lot of the line dances that we did, you're holding hands. You've got some flexibility in there to not be doing exactly what the person next to you are doing. You certainly didn't have to lead, like in one of Rue's dances, where the guy would have to like actually lead something, or right. I mean, not all the stuff you're doing, obviously, but when you're talking about couple dancing and stuff, especially the complex ones, if you will. I mean, you kind of have to know what you're doing before you even ask anybody to dance. And with happy folk dancing, you could just like, oh, grab one hand, grab the other, and that was great. So you could go to anywhere. I was sort of maybe different than a lot of you in that I didn't really teach much, and none of that was really a driver for me. Sort of the social part was more of a driver.
Mm-hmm.
I did move to LA around in 1976. So I actually, this is kind of funny. I went to the intersection once in that time frame. I had gone to get a physical for joining the Navy, and it was right next to, the hospital that I went to was right next to the intersection. So I'm like, oh, I should go there. And it just happened to be Wednesday. So I show up on a Wednesday, and then they invited me to come and go to a what is it? Whatever you do to get invited
Audition.
to an audition. I went to an audition with Tony Beadle and who else was there? Some other people. And so I joined Alma in 76 and danced, I think, 3 or 4 years. And that was fun. But mostly I'm a social dance. So I went country western dancing. I went swing dancing, and I'm still doing that. Fortunately, my wife can really dance super well, so we just go and do whatever's going on. Zydeco dancing, swing dancing, whatever. So, but within this construct, right, if you wanted to go Israeli dancing, you'd go to Cafe Danza. If you wanted to do some of the other things, you might go to some of the other deals, and they had different nights, and it was fantastic. So I think that social part where you can, you could go to the Bay Area and, join in there. I mean, they didn't do exactly the same thing you did, but a lot of them were. And then as Steve was saying, with Pizza Gulli in particular, it was like, oh, this is really cool. So, I started seeking out the live music too. And
that was a big thing for me for the 70s. Yeah, Rue, talk a little bit about, you mentioned it already, but what did we dance?
Well, for me, I was blessed that I was in an environment when I lived in LA area. There was a huge variety of dancing available. There was the coffee house scene, there was the international folk dance scene. Balkan dancing was growing and developing. Live music and music of any kind was a huge influence. If the music touched you, you went with it, or at least that was my case. And so there was a lot of music that kind of grabbed me. There was also a lot of experiences, different kinds of dancing. Jimmy Lomath decided I should learn Scottish dancing and learn Highland dancing. So, I had to take a taste of that. I did a lot of Spanish dancing. I did different kinds of Spanish dancing. As you know, I did research in the Spanish Basque provinces. I tripped over Nordic music and dance. The music blew me away. The dancing blew me away. Yes, there's an exacting quality to it. And yes, there's a very flexible, loving quality to it. So you don't have to be perfect to do it. That's my view.
Who was the tall woman in Santa Monica who was involved with teaching and running a group?
Sharon Denny. Sharon and Armand Denis, very tall woman who has, I
Beautiful
believe,
dancer.
yeah, Pasadena area, and I really hope she has a house now. Yeah. So there was that, and there was this whole growth of the Scandinavian dance community. But there was also the Bonodori Festival that took place in Santa Monica that I got to go to. And beyond that, there was Appalachian Big Circle. We had it in Amman, but I had it other places. I had clogging, I had running sets, I had all of those experiences. New England Contras, yes, those came to Southern California, and some friends, Skip Kroll and Harry Browser, were at UCLA, and hey, come do this with us. And so I got to learn Petronella and all of those fun different things. In addition to that, there's of course square dancing, Ukrainian. We hear a lot about the Ukraine now, but Ukrainian dancing was incredibly popular. Polish dancing. There was a Polish performing group in Orange County, and
Get those red boots
Hungarian.
out, Cherry.
I just want to shout out Hungarian too.
that's on my list. I was part
Yeah.
of Big Oak. I was dancing Hungarian group. I had the amazing, strange, awesome pleasure of partnering Andor at a couple of dance events and camps because he would come by himself. And, you know, then there was this young kid yeah, that was me.
Mhm.
But there was a lot of other stuff too. We did Canadian dancing. Eve and France were bringing Canadian dances down. Eve was at San Diego camp in 1970 when I was there and met the Sodals. And we were kids that hung out together. We laughed, we giggled, and Dick Crum was there. Dick didn't end up finishing his week of teaching, but that's another story. But it all of these people were coming into our milieu and gave us the opportunity to put our feet in those ponds and try them and travel.
Yeah. So exciting. Well, I'd like to move on to our next grouping and call Tom, Cherie, and John stay with us, and Anne. And we're talking about why did we dance? And I think I mentioned first exposures or gateway experiences. A lot of us have already shared that, but also the folk music scene. Tom did a lot of stuff with live music. Cultural, also, Anne has mentioned a lot about the ethnic communities. We've talked about social fun, but also artistic and creative, which is something that I kind of lean on as well. Tom, let's hear from you and Cherie.
Well, I can start. My dancing started in Fresno, California in 1943 during World War II. And from 42 to 38, 48, 43 to 48, those 5 years, very, very important because we learned the dances of those immigrants who brought the dances to Fresno.
Tom, could I just ask you to speak a little bit more into the microphone or
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, that's much better. Thank you.
So, and of course, Fresno has a very lively Greek community. So during that time, I also had Greek friends. A lot of that has to do with sports. My sport was volleyball. I was in high school. I played 3 sports, but I graduated with volleyball, and that's what took me to the Pan American Games, took me to the national championships where we won. And so in the team was a Greek guy named George Sarantos. And so his mother taught me a lot of Greek dancing. And so those 5 years, I'm using them now, especially the Armenian folk dances brought by immigrants. And by the way, we call those people who came to the United States as immigrants not first generation. I'm first generation. Now, has anybody ever heard of just the opposite? The immigrants are first generation. Has anybody ever heard of that? I just want to open up to the panel.
No,
if you're from another country, yeah.
My kids are first generation.
I forget from time to time.
And that's been some sort of an argument about that, where no, the immigrants are first generation. Anyway,
no.
Now, my understanding is the same as yours, Tom, that the first generation were born here.
Yeah.
So it went on, and it's now very important to me because those immigrants have passed away, so I'm doing this now, teaching those immigrant dances. The whole problem was because I'm a musician, is that now the fifth, fourth, third generation, they don't speak the language, one, and they don't know the original dances. They don't know the specific dance to that melody. We have a lot of them, depending on what region you come from. And so that's what I'm doing right now. And that drew me somewhat to the intersection because I was with Greeks all the time, not the first time, but Fresno I had my experiences. But Eighth and I were inseparable. I used to take them to my grandfather's delicatessen. We used to go to Armenian dances. We did a festival together, matter of fact. And after I taught, my night at the intersection was Tuesdays. Would play poker. Would play poker, and then after poker, would go to have that famous Tommy's hot dogs. I enjoyed that. Somebody mentioned that.
Hamburgers.
Everybody here, I've had experiences with all of you. Ann and John and Rue, everybody. And I've had good experiences. I'm very, very happy. But now that I'm 87, on Tuesday, I'm going to be 87. And, to do these things, because there's a lot of documentation, I have to be in shape. So I can't slough, I can't do the dances. I have to do them strongly. So we have a dance studio in Fullerton. And I take ballet from my wife 4 days a week. And then we give workshops and we have a ensemble. We just finished Nutcracker. Then we do a spring show. So that's help. And then lifting weights. So I just want to share this with what I do to keep in condition. And I've done documentation with Hushamadian, with Armenia, and UCLA Armenian Studies program. So if I do anything with folk dancing, it has to be something to do with Armenian undertones or overtones. They'll come to my workshops. So this is what I want to do. I want to spread the Armenian culture with Armenians. It's very simple. If anybody has any questions, I always respond better when I'm asked a question. Other than that, I'll hold off and let the next person go.
Thank you. We're so lucky to have you in Southern California.
Thank you.
Anne?
I think I've already touched on this, that folk dancing was a way to socialize in a new environment. After I left college, a lot of people I'd been friends with in college kind of dispersed. Some moved away, some got married, had a whole other life. Some just, went in a different direction with their friends. And so I didn't have a whole lot of friends that I stayed with. And finding folk dancing was a lifesaver. Like Sherry says that she was very shy, and I was too. And it was very hard to make friends, but folk dancing was a perfect place to be without having to be forced to socialize. You didn't have to talk to anybody if you didn't want to. You could just get in there and dance. And that was very rewarding. So that was part of it. Now, for me also, again, that ethnicity made me feel, oh, I'd finally found people who were like me. Not that they were also immigrants, but that their life was not all centered around whatever American culture was, that it was so varied and so open, and lots of people appreciated the connections with other ethnicities. I think that, I really gravitated towards Greek, and in LA, in Southern California, much more than in the East Coast, there really was a division between the Greek and the Balkan communities. There were some people who bridged both, but it was a whole different population that went dancing and who liked this or this dance or the other dance. But when I finally really sort of settled into the Greek community, I really felt like I had sort of come home. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons I stay. Also, Greek dancing was never there was not a whole lot of Greek dances at the intersection. Even on Greek nights, there were maybe a dozen dances that were done over and over again. And the richness of Greek folk dancing did not really come around until the 80s when Dennis Boxell started teaching things that they had seen in Greece. And now it's incredibly rich. When we would, had Greek nights at Kypseli in the last 20 years, there were so many dances that we uncovered that we started to do. But the difference especially was that the Greek dances there weren't very many choreographed dances. They were all basically done. They were very basic. You did the one steps all the way through. So once you picked up that one step, basically you knew the dance, and that was all you needed. They weren't like so many different steps in one dance. And I think that was also, to me, that was also very attractive because I didn't have to learn all those. Even though I did learn a lot of the Balkan dances, I could lose myself in the Greek dancing. You just kind of lose yourself in the music because you didn't have to concentrate on having to change step at this point in the music or having to change at that point in the music.
It's like the ecstasis that Paul Sheldon said that Ethan Karras always wanted to encourage, I think, and the variation and the personal expression, I think, comes through in the Greek dance. And John, you're great at personal expression and creativity in dance, I think.
I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And that was nice. I mean, that we definitely had star dancers, especially men. And, there were lots of people who wanted to learn those dances, that improvisation. But that came later. In the 70s, that wasn't very much of that at all.
Yeah, but
the one dance.
At the same time, I'm sorry.
Yeah, John.
Sorry. At the same time, one of the reasons people dance because there are these people, there are the Anns and the and the Steves and the Billies, and you guys, you can't make that bigger than it possible. I mean, it's just what happens is it's like people come and then they find out if there's something going on, and if there isn't, eventually they leave, right? But if you have somebody that comes every week, like Sherry's been coming every week for what, 50 years, whatever it is, I don't know, and all of you have, and it makes a huge difference. I mean, that's in part why people dance. They come back to see you. They come back to see the you, whatever that you is in that group. Maybe it changes every night. And maybe there's some other people that are like supporting cast, which is sort of where I sort of view my niche, I suppose, where I could go, I didn't have to teach, but I could participate and, pick some things that I like to do. And that was really fun for me. And so, I think it's not a small thing that there are people that consistently go every week, maybe the same Wednesday or the same Friday, or maybe they teach multiple classes, whatever. But they're there and they're doing the same thing, they're playing the same music, they're emphasizing the same things. And it changes over time, and they learn more things and they do different things, and maybe they do a group. But I didn't really care one way or the other about being in a group. I just, I joined Amman because that's, I wanted to learn some dances, and I didn't know any better about, what other dance groups were around. I would have liked to gone to Jack Kinnear's now that I look back on it, because the teaching stuff was very cool. But, I think those people are, if you look around under the why we dance part, you look around everywhere, and there's, Vicky and San Diego and, you name it. And then the other people who, you could import them, you could bring in a Dick Crum here, and you could bring in a Tom Basigi in there, even though he was teaching a lot as well.
So speaking of,
can I add one thing?
Yes.
Because that's very important. In the Greek dance world began to change in about 1974 when Nikos Savidas came to the United States.
Yeah. Yes.
I have my little piece of paper.
Yeah. He just changed the Greek scene completely because he brought a whole new style and set of dances that nobody had done before correctly.
It's true.
Big influence on the Greek dance community.
It took a long time though, because I think once the kids started learning those and started doing them, he was a brilliant dancer. I tried to get Barry Glass to invite him to teach in Amman, but didn't happen. Brilliant dancer. Brilliant.
He did work with Avaz.
Oh, did he? Oh, cool.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
did.
it was. I always enjoyed his teaching because he would teach and he would teach and he would teach and then okay, let's put the music on and dance. Completely different, totally different. The rhythm may be different, the step may be different, but boy, that guy can dance.
All right. So that is a great transition to our next grouping of Mitch, Husai, Sherry, and Rune. We're going to talk about when did we dance? So sort of the kinds of events that were created that we found each other at. And while we're waiting for this group to come together, I'm just going to mention if the tech crew, somebody has a bibliography that I created, and some of these are more general sources about folk dancing, but some of them do have very specific written histories, talking about the history of folk dancing. Even in some of the books, it even dates all the way to late 19th century, early 20th century, and sort of how folk dancing grew out of various movements in the U.S. and globally. Check out that bibliography if that can get dropped into the chat.
Well, Lori, Paula, Adoni, we can see if we can find it to paste it in the chat. And then if not, or in addition, next week, let's get together. You can give it to us, so we'll get it out in a MailChimp.
I can also drop it in when I'm finished here.
Oh, you got it.
Yeah.
Well,
Sherry.
it's not on topic, but I want to follow up on what John was saying.
Absolutely.
That these groups were in fact social groups, and the fact that we were dancing was just the excuse. As Chip was saying, people would go to this particular place and that particular place and the other particular place all on the same night because there was a group of people they wanted to see, and those people were there every week. And those became your friends, and they stayed your friends. And it wasn't just the fact you were dancing with them; it was the fact that it was those people, and they became social circles. And the people that you saw there, you'd see elsewhere. This was even more true in the performing groups, where you were forced to be with each other 3 times a week or 5 times a week or whatever it was. And the people in the performing groups, myself included, and many of the other people on this panel, we lived with each other, we slept with each other, we married each other, we divorced each other, we fought each other, we threw Slurpees at each other because we were this group of people that were very closely tied. And in fact, here we are 50 years later, and we're still talking to each other. So I think while the dancing was important, I think ultimately the fact that these became our families or our well, you might want to call them a cult, or you might want to call it a floating crap game, was what actually that is what drew everybody and what is so emotionally important to all of us now. The dancing was nice, but if we had all been on the same sports team for 50 years, it probably would have had the same results.
Possibly. I would say that there is a creative, artistic sort of basis.
Okay, we'll call it a theater company
and the
then.
folk dancing, that keeps us. But yeah, let's hear about some of Fusai. I'm so interested in your history of coming all the way from Japan. I mean, I know Japanese are great travelers, but I've met Japanese in Bulgaria, but coming all the way from Japan to Mendocino folklore, and then later on to Stockton, and then of course, I know it was late 70s until you met Atanas, but tell us a little bit about.
Well, I started folk dancing in my college, and after I graduated, my ex-husband, who started going to former Yugoslavia, and I think he met Steve over there, and we had Bora Azkok, Sunny Bloland, Moshiko Halevi, Eve Moreau, Tom Bazugian. Everybody, those people came to Japan during the 70s. And actually, the American lady whose name was Phoebe, who used to work at the Bank of America Japanese branch. And she was a folk dancer in, I think, UC Berkeley. She and Bora were same age, I guess. And she started coming to our group in Tokyo. And I think she introduced us about Mendocino Folklore Camp. So one year, 76, I believe, yeah. We went to Mendocino Folklore Camp, which was like unbelievably wild in the sense of the where it was. You have to sleep in a cabin without lights and water and everything. I was just so impressed in a way. And then after that, we went to see Aman concert. And I believe I met Billy Burke at that time. I think we went to his parents' house for dinner or something. And then we were dancing in Japan still, and from those teachers who came to Japan, we heard about Stockton camp and all other different camps in the United States. So I started going to Stockton 78. I met Tom there. And I think Alexander was there. And I went to also San Diego camp after that. And then 79, I heard about Atanas from all those teachers, and I needed to see him, his golden feet. So I found out he was teaching in New York, Moshe Skaya's camp. So I went there, and that's it. I asked him to come to Japan. And since 1980, he came every year till 85, and then after that, every other years. So we had so many teachers in Japan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the camps were so important because I think exposing so many people to so many dance forms, and people coming to the teachers coming from all over to the camps, and people coming from all over to the camps. But there is also, we've talked a lot already today about special nights of dancing, but there were also festivals. The Renaissance Fair we haven't mentioned, but the Renaissance Pleasure Fair, Southern California, Northern California, Pichu Guli played. I remember Nama playing at KPFK fundraisers in Santa Monica. So there's all kinds of events and parties that were occurring. So memories. And Colo Festival, we should say.
Yes.
We have to talk about that too. Anyone want to jump in?
There were a couple. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, go ahead, Mitch.
No, you.
One of those different kinds of events really offered a different kind of experience. I mean, I've danced at Colo, I've danced at the Renaissance Fair, I've danced at festivals, I've danced in recreational groups, I've danced in performing groups, and each one of them brought a whole different milieu of environment and cultural things to go with it. And also, Fusai, what you mentioned about the camps. Every year, the camp brought 5, 7, 9 different teachers, different cultures, different experiences for us to enjoy, to relish in, and take with us what we could from that kind of environment in the family or community that Mitch spoke about earlier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Well, one of the interesting things about the 70s was the fact that we were on some people's radar at least. I mean, KPFK had an annual thing for folk dancers, and KPFK. This is a radio station. They have no connection to this community other than the fact they saw there was a huge group of people doing that, and so they put on an event every year. There was a guy named Irvin who had a show every year. I forgot his name.
Erwin Parnes.
Irwin Parnes ran a show every year where he would bring in a bunch of community groups to perform, and he could sell it out because he knew their parents would come and their friends would come. But he was not part of this community. But for that time, for the 70s, folk dancing was so popular that there were even people on the outside world who happened to notice us, which was, I don't think it's ever happened before or ever happened since. But at that particular time, it did happen.
We did actually have Mario Cassetta. Had Folk Dance with Mario on KPFK. And I know that I still remember so clearly Esma Rajapova's Chaye was his intro song. And then I got to meet Esma in Skopje, Macedonia. And I thought, that's an arc. I mean, from a little girl listening to a radio station, I got to meet that star. So, yeah, sorry to just make that plug. Sherry.
What did you want to ask me?
Well, we could touch on Colo Festival, for example, or any of these kinds of amazing special events that we had.
It's all kind of a blur in a way because we did everything. We couldn't get enough. We went to the camps, we went to the coffee houses, we went to the festivals, we went, to the workshops. Um, uh, you know, somewhere in like the 80s and 90s, I started bringing teachers to Los Angeles, like Fusai did to Japan. I would bring them on a workshop tour. And they would do like 10 or 12 workshops in a row at all of the different groups. I kind of was able to function both in the federation world and the coffee house world, which they were a little bit separated more back then than well, there's no coffee houses now, but those groups of people didn't always mix. But for me, I wanted it all. And I had a little performing group that performed at the KPFK festival. Um, and like you said, like we talked, I was teaching many, many nights of the week, and then I started getting involved with the camps. I started becoming an organizer. I started working for the camps, and I became a videographer, and I started running music, and and eventually I created my own camp, Life Los Angeles International Folk Dance Extravaganza, and brought
great.
and brought Zlatny Usti from New York, all 12 members, and brought, bands from San Francisco. It was, you kind of went wherever, something was happening or you made something happen. And I know you wanted to touch on the Tucson invasion. 1976 seems to have been a really important year because other people have mentioned that they came to Los Angeles in 1976.
Yeah,
So
that was a big year.
That's the year that I came, and Bruce and Darlene and Glenn and Carol, who stopped folk dancing, but the rest of us either went to performing groups or went to teaching in Los Angeles. And I never thought about it having an impact, but until you brought it up.
It did. The Tucson people you were all excellent dancers and very influential. John Hegland also, God rest his soul. So we're going to segue just because we're starting to run low on time here.
Not enough time at all.
I know, but we're going to quickly touch on where did we dance, and then hopefully get to our final grouping. So we have Mitch staying on, Billy, Steve, and Paul. So we had clubs. I mean, we've touched on a lot of these things already. Clubs, schools, universities. We've talked a lot about UCLA, the coffee houses, the cafes, but also communities. I say communities of the countries or cultures of origin.
Yeah, I want to jump in with a long list that I can run down fairly quickly. It's rather disorganized, but I started dancing at the Ice House in Sierra Madre. It was an old ice house that was converted to dance classes and theater classes. It was a great place to start. And then graduated to Pasadena Co-op, which met at Avenue Elementary School for a long time. They taught folk dancing at Elliott Junior High School when I was there in the 1960s, and also at Pasadena City College when I got there later. Then, as I branched out to the groups, there was Westwood Co-op, and we went to the Colo Festival and Santa Barbara Camp and Statewide Festival and Laguna Festival. There was an international house in East LA where the Gandhi dancers rehearsed, and a lot of the prior generation, the Rudy Dennises and the Robin and Vince Evanchuks and the Renee Besnias and folk like that, danced at International House. And then, of course, the coffee houses. Vince and Robin Evanchuk had a great impact. Liberty Assembly was wonderful for people who liked American. And Vince's Ukrainian group that was mentioned before started out with all men. It was Dick Oakes and Mitch and Billy and me and Frank Trippy and Don Green. And the official name was Carpathian Express, but the informal name was Great Balls of Fire, which we liked a lot. Then the Israeli Jewish scene, of course, spawned all kinds of places to dance. Almost every temple. David Katz is on the call with us tonight. He taught at many temples. David and 10 other Israeli dancers and I started Admati Israeli Dancers in the mid 1970s, and we performed all around Southern California for free. There was a Macedonian group called Sobrania that David Shockett and Renee Besnia had started. Mitch mentioned Interteen Folk Dancers at Portola Junior High School in the Valley was a hotbed. There was Scottish with Jimmy Lomath and C. Stewart Smith at a junior high school in East LA that we loved to go to. Vilma Machette was around doing various Greek things, and of course, Ruby Vucita was the sort of the convener of the Balkan dance scene in Southern California. The Aman Institutes were great. San Diego had various camps. Claremont was a hotbed for a while. There were groups out there in Claremont, and Sherry did her festivals out there. Polly mentioned the pleasure fairs, the KPFK events. Mario Cassetta had a group on South Figueroa that Billy took over for a while. And then there were picnics, Serbian picnics and Croatian picnics and Polish picnics and Scottish picnics. So that's kind of my long, short list that I'll just be quiet now because we have minimal time left.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just mention one single place, and this was probably the best place to folk dance ever, and that was on the beach on Santa Barbara on Sundays,
Yes.
barefoot.
Yeah.
And there was this little area, and they had music every Sunday for, I don't know, a decade. And this was back when everyone was a hippie and nobody wore shoes and most people
Hey, I
wore
wasn't
clothes. And we would be dancing every Sunday on the beach in Santa Barbara with the ocean in the background. And when you got too hot, you ran into the water and you came back out and danced again. That I don't think was replicated pretty much anywhere.
No.
No, the slab in Santa Barbara, it was great.
And that's connected to the Plaka, right?
No, entirely unrelated.
No, but a lot of the people.
Not unrelated.
Dance
Same
folk
people.
places.
Same people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It started off grass and then it was a dirt circle by the end of the season, right?
Yes.
And of course,
the grass would all die where everyone was
California-centric.
dancing, and the grass was around everywhere
We need
else.
to mention Ashkenaz in Northern California, but then also all the dancing that was taking place in Corvallis and Eugene and Portland and Seattle and on up into Canada. There was a lot of dancing that those of us from Southern California only got to occasionally.
I'll just throw in a funny story once that we were dancing in David Shockett's living room to live music, including Zurla, played by Nestor, and Marty Koenig and Ellie Buck from the East Coast were visiting, and we were smoking some grass in the back room, and there was I'll never forget this. There was a screen door open, and all of a sudden there are two cops standing there, and Marty Koenig is saying in Serbian, "Militia, militia, police, police." And they just said, "Could you guys keep it down?" And then one of the cops looked at Nestor and said, "Is that Ravi Shankar?" And I used to dance also at the Hungarian House and Bases Hall sometimes. So some of the cultural centers as well.
Mm-hmm.
and even in Nestor's restaurant in Glendale.
Mm-hmm.
Delicatessen.
If there was a
Yeah.
place to dance, we danced.
Mm-hmm.
And Nestor's Delicatessen.
Yeah.
And,
And
and
Nestor's American European delicatessen.
Billy, you have a strong relationship with St. Anthony's.
Yeah, I taught the children's group for about 7 years, and then I had a few years off, and then I taught the Golden Girls, we called them, the mothers, for about 15, 16 years. Yeah, it was a real, yeah, I had a great time there. I was blessed that because I was interested in, of the five kids in my family, I was the one that took interest and kept interest in dancing. And San Francisco is such a rich area, the Bay Area, for cultures. I learned a polka, waltz, and schottisch at the tourist club in Oakland and Mill Valley. Uh, I danced with an Italian group. I danced with the Greeks. I danced with the Russians. We had a Russian performing, one of those, just like Atanas, we had a performing group. We rehearsed a whole bunch. We never performed. I rehearsed a whole bunch with the Russian group. We never performed. But we rehearsed a lot. And the funny thing with the Russia, with the connection between the tourist club and the Russians was one of the Euro boys from the tourist club, German. I mean, like we're dealing with pure, German. Danced with the Russian group. He was what I call an aerialist. In Russian dance, there's people that jump up and do things in the air, and people that do things way down on the floor where I was. Well, he was an aerialist, and he was dancing, and one of the Russian girls, and he married and they had their wedding at the California Hall in San Francisco with Joe Schmiel, who was a music teacher in Oakland, but he had Joe's Papa band, and he could play anything, colos and anything. So we start in California Hall with all the Russians on one side and all the Germans on the other side. And by the end of it, with Joe mixing the music and going back and forth, they were all over each other. I mean, and that really, to me, that is the epitome of what we enjoy. I only do the dances I do to respect and honor the cultures that from which they came. I mean, that's why I am involved in this. I love honoring and being part of or feeling part of amongst a culture. And that kind of event there just showed me the culture share, though they can be distinct, they share so much. One of my kids and one of my dancers in my classes came to me one time and said, Mr. Burke, I never realized that when people are doing dances from their culture, they're actually having fun."
Yes. Oh, that's great. So we're going to transition for our last grouping of Tom, Husai, Cherie, and Paul and talk about how did we dance. And again, we've been touching on many of these topics, but again, the teachers and the leaders and the styling of dance. I remember being very, very influenced in the 70s when Marty Koenig came out and did a workshop. That was a little bit of a mini revolution for me. So let's talk about, and then also sort of the recreational versus performing. And we've also touched on live music. So let's talk about how did we dance? Tom, shall we?
I kind of touched on how I started. Uh, we have a certain amount of dances in our family. My mother's side is from Harpert. These are all going to be towns in eastern Turkey. And my grandparents are from Alaşehir. And that movement after 1828 and the defeat of the Persians by the Russians, many Armenians joined the Russian forces and went into new areas of Armenia, 1828. And that's really where my dance education, my experiences, and that's where I started to love international folk dancing because I was doing Armenian folk dancing, and then with the Greeks in Fresno, and then at one of the state conventions, folk dance convention, I believe it was in Bakersfield. Now Bakersfield had some good dancers, and that's where I met Evanchuk, and he was doing Greek dancing for the Greeks. He was hired by who was the dentist? Chris Tsoulis. Does anybody remember that name?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Chris Tsoulis has passed
Yeah,
away.
Chris Tasoulis put out a great Macedonian album with Ethan Karras.
That's right. And that 1960 still
Really hard to find. Great album. Good dancing.
dancers, then I was.
Berovka.
That's right. We can go on and on, right, Chip, about all those days. We had a lot.
Tom, you were in that crew at International House too, right?
That's right. There's wherever, international folk came right in at the perfect time for me. And then when I went to school in Armenia, I came back, then I started teaching Armenian. That's how I got into Armenian international folk dancing, is teaching all around the world. And boy, you can go to any group anywhere in the world. But the strongest was Japan with Husai, strong dancers. They kept the dances, and I hope they still do them. Husai,
They do. Yes, we do.
Okay, so they're very, very strong. The next level, I would say, was Holland. They have a strong folk dance culture over there. So those in Japan, there were no connection with the Armenians, and in Holland, there was no connection. So we built it that way. So that's what I want to add. That's a little bit of my experiences, but those were fond memories from the 1940s and 50s, and then in Japan and Holland in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, I may be prejudiced, but I thought back in the 70s, we were very interested in learning styling and doing the dances exactly the right way that the teacher taught it and keeping it that way. I don't know if it's different now. Maybe there are people that like to do that, but I just see there's a lot of dances now that look generic a little bit to me. And just working with Tom now, it's so essential that he gets the styling to this new generation of Armenians, and that they preserve not only the steps, but the styles of the dances and the regions of each country, that it doesn't all start to look like just pan-Armenian.
Sherry, what you're saying, what you're saying is so important because it's what distinguishes different cultures. Ukrainian is not Greek, is not African, is not Armenian. And if we don't pay attention to the subtleties of the style and the presence of people like Tom Bozigian when we're dancing, to learn that by osmosis. I was saying last night, dancing next to Tom Bozigian, it's like dancing next to a rock. He's just so solidly grounded in who he is and Armenian culture. It's a lifetime peak experience.
And then I think also the people that carry on that. So in Fusai, we have the repository of Atanas's work. And I know I saw Atanas. I was 17 years old the first time I saw Atanas, and I thought I had seen God. I just, it was mind blowing to see him dancing.
Do you remember when Atanas came for the first time? It was 1956 when Tanis and Kolo came to the United States. Do you remember that year?
I heard about it. That was what got Ruby Vuceta going.
And
it was Ruby Pritchard then, I think.
And her friend, Lonnie Papadal. Does that name ever creep into your mind? Lonnie?
I hear the name.
Yeah, it's going back a long time. She and her sister, they're half Greek.
And before we go, someone put in the chat, Dina said, we really have to remember John Filsich and the contribution of Festival Records in Los Angeles and in San Francisco. How many of us got our music from Festival Records?
I did.
I worked there when I first joined.
Boxes of records.
When I first moved to LA, I worked at Festival Records in LA.
I still have the Dumbek I bought there.
I'd like to say something about John, if I can. Can I be heard?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Bring Billy back,
Billy,
please.
you can't be silenced.
Yeah. Yana, his daughter, asked me to come down to LA and went through his storage shed where he had half his store. We cataloged 144 boxes of 78s.
Wow.
Bring him over here. I'll hold them up on camera.
I'm taking a bunch of them and digitizing them and cleaning them. And I'm finding the copyright is 1908.
David Katz just brought this out of the closet. The cameras not focusing on it with my blurred background, but this is a festival record box.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, these are
That's three
cardboard
of them.
boxes. So, as I said, 144 boxes of 78s, and that's only the 78s. That's not the LPs or whatever. So, at some point in the future, you'll be able to go to his website, and he still has one, and you'll look up a song or a dance, and it'll show a picture of the label, and you click on it, and it'll play the tune. That's my project.
That
That's
will be
awesome.
incredible.
That's a big undertaking.
Well, so
Andrew Carney, take note.
so this has been, if we can, I don't know if we can bring back all of the panelists or not. Lori, you had your hand up. There was one. Lori?
Yeah.
Paul, I hate to cut you off, but it is 7:30.
Yes.
And, you know,
Yeah.
we have a pretty strict deadline here at at Stockton. We want to.
We're all
is that
dying.
okay?
Yes. I was hoping to take questions from the audience, but I think that we've had a super active chat and people asked questions and people answered questions in the chat. So I thank you for all of those people. And again, thank you to Sherry. This is my first time being involved backstage at Stockton. And I also want to thank Holly and Adoni and all of the tech crew, the supports. This is a remarkable, 20 years from now, we'll be commenting on this incredible experience and community. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, panelists. You all are, again, I'm just going to say my idols, and I so appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula.
Thanks,
Great
Paula.
job.
Thanks for
Paula,
doing this.
thank you.
Paula.
Paula,
Keeping
thank
us
you
on
for
schedule.
moderating.
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome.